And I will hand it over to Kara.
The shit,
Introductions.
the things that.
Great, everyone. Welcome. So happy to have each of you here for our panel. I think this is our third or fourth panel of this year. We've been having so many wonderful dynamic conversations and so honored for our participants and our speakers that we've had thus far this year. My name is Kara Golden. I am the Programs Director at OCCJ, and our mission is to inspire and equip Oklahomans to overcome bias, bigotry, and oppression with the vision that in our generation, Oklahoma can be what we know it can be, that inclusive, just, and hospitable state for everyone who has the opportunity to live here. We truly believe that everyone who participates in any one of our programs in any way is helping us achieve those goals. So thank you so much in advance for leaning in, for being curious, for asking the critical questions that I'm sure you will have of our speakers once we get a chance to hear from them a little bit. As you know, the work that we are striving to do in our current climate, it gets more and more challenging every day. But it's so imperative that we are doing that and that we continue to do so in a meaningful and open and honest way. So again, thank you for leaning in, each and every one of you. I'm going to go ahead real quick and read our bios as introductions to our panelists. So we have with us today Carrie McLean, who currently serves as the inaugural Chief Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer at the Tulsa City County Library. She leads the library's internal ED&I strategy and implementation across the organization to address equity, diversity, and deepen efforts to live out its values of inclusion. She has over 12 years of experience in advocacy, outreach, access, development, community building, and ED&I work. She is a licensed professional counselor with a master's in human relations from the University of Oklahoma. So excited to have you with us, Carrie. Thank you so much. And I'll also add, Carrie went through our Inclusive Leadership Institute program last year as well. We also have we also have with us Erica Lucas, who is the founder of Stitch Crew, an organization providing capital and resources to the new majority entrepreneurs. Erica also founded VEST, a peer network for women professionals and investment fund, investing in women-led companies, building solutions for the intersection of the care economy and the future of work. Erica is a thought leader, a sought-after speaker, and LinkedIn top voice on venture capital and entrepreneurism. She is on the board of Arvest Bank, the Division Hub, and the Oklahoma City County Health Department, as well as a member of the Latino Corporate Directors Association, Familia VC, and Somos VC. Prior to Stitch Crew and VEST, Erica was a partner at a private equity firm investing in aerospace and defense. And before that, she was a global director at the Oklahoma Department of Commerce. And I will add that she was also honored in our Oklahoma City dinner in our recent years as well. And then we also have Vanessa Adams Harris, who is a Muskogee Creek American Indian with African-American European ancestry. She is an artist, actor, giving particular interest to the historical accuracy of the African-American and Indigenous aesthetic. A producer, director, documentary filmmaker, AACT adjudicator, workshop facilitator, presenter, playwright, docent, human rights community activist, peace builder, and spirit walker. She has performed and or presented both nationally and internationally. She is the Director of Outreach and Alliances for the John Hope Franklin Center for Reconciliation, where she trains community members to become docents discussing the 1921 Tulsa race riot/massacre and the history of African American and Native peoples in Oklahoma. She is also a 2018 Oklahoma Scholar and is training with an international coalition of women as drivers toward peace building, just governance, human security X initiatives of change cause Switzerland. I hope I pronounced that right. Currently, she is pursuing an MFA Interdisciplinary Studies degree from Goddard College, Plainfield, Vermont. Her emphasis is on theater, arts, place, and identity. Thank you so much for joining us again, Vanessa. She joined us last year in our Native and Indigenous Women panel as well. So thank you all so much for joining us. And I'll turn it back to Victoria.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kara. Just for some quick introductions from the OCCJ side, my name is Victoria Dangton Devon-Apsigan. I work as a program coordinator here at OCCJ, and I am privileged to serve on our amazing team. Kara Golden, the Director of Development, the Director of Programs, Morgan Allen White, the Director of Development, Phil Armstrong, the President and CEO, and Shadi Nadir, our Office Administrator, who are all on the panel. All on this call, all OCCJ staff have the word OCCJ in front of them. So if any of you all have any questions, concerns, or need help with logistics, please feel free to private message them. Just some logistics also from our audience. We fully want you to participate with us, but we ask that you stay on mute for the duration of the panel discussion. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send it to Morgan Allen White. She will be leading the Q&A period. And additional logistics, we had some amazing questions from you all sent in. We'll try to get through all of them. Forgive us if we are not able to, but we'll try our very best. And with that out of the way, I think it's time to commence our panel. I've been so excited about this, seeing the dynamic speakers that we have on here. So I will jump right into it. So starting off with our first question to you all, what do you think is the most significant barrier to female leadership? And what is the most significant benefit to female leadership?
I guess I'll start, and I'll be preface this with lived experiences.
Carrie, I think we're having some problem hearing you audio-wise.
Is that better?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, sorry. I want to preface basically where I'm coming from, being from my own lived experience when I answer these questions. So not to generalize, if there is a generalization, do know it's coming from my eye space and things that I've navigated through. But to answer that question, and I'm a very transparent person, but I'd say biases rooted in patriarchy tend to be a significant barrier to leadership. The belief that women aren't able to do the job because they may be too emotional or are caretakers, so that will take the bandwidth to do the job. So for me, it is really that bias rooted in those thought processes, those beliefs that tend to be a significant barrier to female leadership. On the converse of that, what's most important, what is the most important benefit to female leadership is, I think that we come to the table with such a plethora of experiences and backgrounds. I tend to be meticulous on details and seeing the bigger picture and putting the pieces together. So I think as individuals and as women, we have so many talents that we bring to the table that may be overshadowed sometimes by these rooted biases that people may have.
I can go next if that's okay, Vanessa. I think it's such a big problem that I don't think that you can narrow it down to just one thing. But if I have to choose, and I can just be quick, it would be three things. One is that for the longest time, we have focused on fixing women as opposed to workplaces and spaces that weren't necessarily designed with us in mind, us, women, or people in general. And then the next one is actually the fact that we've made gender equity a women's issue when it really should be everyone's issue, right? Because it affects all of us. And if we could make, for me, I'm focused obviously in the workplace. So if we could fix workplaces to be more flexible and inclusive for everyone, it's not just women that benefit, it's our male colleagues and working parents and other communities in general. And I would say the third, and perhaps, and we're seeing it now real time, perhaps one of the most damaging is that we as women have been led to believe that if we just assimilate into these workplaces, we'll achieve economic mobility, we'll achieve proximity to power, we'll achieve influence, and then we can fix things. But in reality, what ends up happening is that we then assimilate, and to hold on to that, and if we achieve those positions because of proximity to power, to males or to other things, you know, we sometimes have hung on to that power and we don't care who we have to leave behind or step on top of, including women, to hold on to that power. So I think assimilation is right now what we're seeing with, you know, with a lot of our female colleagues in Congress, with a lot of our female colleagues at the state legislature, voting for things that actually can keep systemic barriers and unending cycles of poverty for not just women, but other communities. So I think those are the three, you know, if I had to pick three, those would be it. And then in terms of, you know, the most beneficial, I think everything that we've been taught that it's wrong with women, right? The fact that we do bring emotion to the workplace, you know, it actually makes us more empathetic. It is actually, the data shows that women are better at creating more flexible and inclusive workspaces that, again, benefit not just women, but everyone. Also, you know, it's a lot of the trades that are called soft skills, but in reality, they're not, right? And especially now with AI and technology and automation coming in, now people are realizing that those soft skills that are, you know, natural for women a lot of times, or female tendencies, they're coming in like at the top, right, for a lot of recruiters. So I think, you know, that would be the most beneficial things that we bring in, and we just need to get out of our system the notion that those are soft skills, or that they are, you know, things we should be ashamed or that we should try to suppress.
So I'm going to agree with what my colleagues have said, but I'm just going to piggyback on two things that they both said about the prevailing misogynistic attitude that exists, because misogyny can happen whether you are identifying as a female or male. And so I really like for us to pay attention to that, because sometimes as women, as or as people who are identifying as a weaker entity or human, then we blame ourselves for this attitude that we're getting. And it's not your fault. A system was created around misogyny for the purposes of white supremacy. And so we automatically are not going to benefit from that type of a system. So it's not our fault that we're not in leadership positions. And then even though some of those women who are in leadership positions, like some of the congresswomen that we have, or congress people that we have, their attitudes are still prevailing in that type of a system. So who is the person that you go to for leadership that looks like you, that sounds like you, that makes you feel whole and complete? The benefit of having people like us in your midst is that we bring balance to it. We bring voice, we bring our whole selves. And I can be soft. I am soft. I don't know the definitions of these words that were created without me in the room, right? And so I can only bring how I feel to something, and I can be very proud of that. And so I think all of us hold that, right? Not being apologetic for being who you are is the main thing. Not being apologetic, even though I'm the first person to apologize for doing something. But for who I am, I do not apologize for that, because I know that I'm coming into a space and I'm bringing love, all the love that I was given and shown. And I want to make sure that I push that back out.
Wow, thank you all for sharing. I think something that definitely hit me in what you all were saying, specifically with the emotional piece, it's sometimes very much weaponized with women is, oh, you're being too emotional, or you're not thinking straight, or you're not being logical. And to reframe that and saying, actually, no, it's a benefit to have emotions in the room. It is a benefit to be able to bring that empathy to the table. And I can use words that, you would understand or makes you feel more comfortable, but the truth and reality of it is that it is a positive thing and not a negative. So thank you. Thank you all for sharing and talking about that a little more. Moving on to our next question. Speaking about power structures, systems of oppression, and the misogyny built into systems, how did you navigate power structures early on in your career versus later on in your career when you had a more formal leadership role?
I can jump in there first, Carrie, since you went first the last time. And I will just simply say that in my younger years, I wasn't really aware of the system of misogyny, and I just wasn't aware of it. I wasn't thinking about it. I was just so appreciative of the opportunity to do something and to be in the space that I kind of wasn't paying attention, maybe. And so I just thought always that that's just the way things are, right? In certain places, there's the boss, and the boss is a man, and the man does blah, 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 blah. Even though in my home with my mother and father, my mother was very much so the person that did everything, that we went to for everything. I don't know what kind of structure that is, if that's very native or not, but my father's a native man. My mother was very much so in control of our household and what we did. And so not until I left the workplace and then came back into it as a little more mature, that I discovered that what? Has this been the deal? Really? So yeah, I'm about just having that voice and being present, right? And yes, you will respect me today. Yes, you will. I hope that gets somebody going somewhere.
Hear a lot of modeling in your experience, Vanessa. But I'd say for me, navigating power structures early on, I, without knowing it, and until I got further into age and learned more about formal mentorship, it dawned on me that it was really mentoring that I received that helped me navigate power structures throughout my career early on. Someone sort of just taking me under their wing to provide me guidance for information sharing, or just, hey, this will be helpful for you to know, or um, and it was very informal. It wasn't like, hey, can you be my mentor? Someone just the personalities clicked, or maybe they saw what I could bring to the table or the potential in me. Either way, it was extremely helpful for me to have someone who looked like me, or had similar backgrounds and experiences that I could go to converse about what was happening in the workplace, but then also get feedback on, you may not want to approach it that way, or it'll be helpful if you talk to this person in this context so that you can go from A to Z, if you will. So having mentorship and people to talk with, navigate difficult conversations, bounce ideas, be thought partners, extremely beneficial for me in my earlier career, and still to this day, extremely helpful.
I think my experience was very similar. I was terrible at it. I was terrible in that I did everything we tell women to do, right? Strive for perfection, stay longer hours, work, and particularly for women of color, it's not just work twice as hard, but 3-4 times as hard. Hide your emotions, focus on yourself, all of those things. And I actually did achieve workplace mobility through that, upward mobility to that. But then I ended up finding myself alone without peers and mentors that I could rely on, that I could be vulnerable with, and sharing kind of my experiences and, you know, how I wanted to lead teams, and burned out. And I think that that's what we're seeing right now, right? With, yes, we do have more women in the C-suite, if you will, but 50% of women in the C-suite are now considering quitting the labor force in general and or downsizing their role or starting their own business, right? Because they're not willing to accept a model that was, again, not designed with us in mind. So I did all of those things, and then until, again, I got burned out, and then I decided, you know, I was one of those that started, you know, I'm going to start my own business or my own initiative, and that's how Stitch Grew Invest were started.
Well, thank you all for sharing your personal stories. It definitely gives context to different paths that different people take to leadership and what that has looked like. And touching a bit more in detail about the structure and some of the effects of the structure of oppression and the structure of misogyny that a lot of workplaces are built on. How can women individually and collectively advocate for greater pay equity?
I can start on this one since you guys started on the other one. I would say, first of all, I want to give a shout out to all the men that decided to join us this morning. Thank you for being here, because I think that to back to your question, it has to be collectively. You know, one, if we try to do it individually, it's too much work, and you're just gonna, again, end up being burned out, and it's just impossible, right? I mean, it's even I with there's some amazing VEST members here, by the way. I want to give shout out to VEST members. So VEST is a peer network of women professionals from C-suite to VP all the way to emerging leaders. And even with them and their support, and you know, we meet every month to talk about all of this, and even with that support system, it still feels heavy. So I really don't think that you can achieve anything by yourself. I think that's actually another thing that's been damaging to the workplace, you know, that we've romanticized with this lone wolf self-made billionaire that started their company from nothing. And it's now, nobody builds companies alone. Nobody builds nonprofits alone. Nobody advocates alone if you're successful at it. You know, and so I think we need to get away from that and really start doing things collectively. And we need to engage men and, you know, non-binary people, anybody that identifies as women, because this is an everyone's issue.
I've been napping over here as you were talking. This question pulled me back to a comment you made earlier in regards to the first question, and you talked about assimilation being a barrier for us as women. And I don't think we talk about that enough. And you talked about it being a collective effort, and that rings true to me in so many ways, because what I'm seeing as I'm working with our staff in different avenues, what I'm seeing is that people get so stuck in their own identities and the challenges that they're facing that we don't see as a collective who else is being impacted, and how can we utilize our voice collectively to raise those concerns and also provide the solutions for those concerns too. So not only being a part of raising awareness, but then utilizing our voices, our thoughts, our backgrounds, our experiences to put forth or advocate for what that change can look like as a collective. I felt as I've grown in my career that there's so much focus on the individual and making it to the top and getting the power, sort of as you talked about, Erica. And I felt that deeply, because I've experienced that too. And it becomes so much harder to be the lone person or only person, sort of looking at the bigger picture and sort of trying to redirect people back to the collective and how is this impacting the rest of us, and how can we use our voice in making the change or offering solutions for the change. So I just have to reiterate the collective voice in that. As women, whether you are Latina, Black, Native, whatever background you have, also realizing that we're all having some sort of similar experience when it does come to pay inequity. And how can we be looking out for each other, not just from our individual lens of how we're being impacted.
And I'm in agreement with both of my cohorts here, very much so. I think there needs to be a really strong support system, and that we need to be honest about what we need. And I know sometimes I even have this, I used to have this issue about, especially if I was performing and someone would ask me, you know, what's going to be my fee? And I talked to a lot of upcoming performers about this, because we don't know our value. And so we won't always ask for what it is that we need. And we haven't even thought about what does that look like, right? And sometimes we'll throw a number out there and then we'll think, oh, that's going to be too much, or maybe that's not enough. And we're so, there's such an inner turmoil of us, and I'm going to say specifically women, or us identifying as female, that we have a problem with knowing our value, to be able to speak to it. So if I'm doing a certain performance, maybe that performance is going to be $3,000 because it's going to entail this, and this. Or maybe it's going to be 5,000 because what it's going to entail for me. And you have to get to a safe place in yourself, and you have to have a support system around you, as Carrie said earlier about the mentorship. Who has been mentoring you about this very thing? Have you been bringing this up with anyone? Is it a real concern of yours first and foremost before you're doing anything else? So the honesty in this dialogue, the inner dialogue, is really, really important. And knowing what you place value on, like I know what I place value on, and I know what I want, what I want to receive with that. And so I really try to pay attention to what is going on inside of myself and what I need.
Wow, such powerful words of wisdom from you all. It's interesting because a lot of the questions we got was about how do we have our male counterparts and colleagues be advocates. And so that this next question specifically deals with that as well. And that's, what is the role of specifically older white men in their efforts of supporting women as allies in the workplace?
So I just have a question with that. Why are we saying white male? Is it because we're assuming that white men are the bosses, or I just need a clarification on that question.
I think that is the perspective from that question. I think it's also speaking historically, with women being a bit more newer in the workspaces, and historically white men being kind of the bosses in a lot of different workspaces. But I agree. I think that is the assumption behind this question.
Okay, all right. So I'm just gonna dive in here with myself here. Coming from the place that I come from, I've never looked for a white male allyship. That makes sense. I didn't have that understanding that white males were over me or anything that I did. And so I treated them accordingly, as though we were colleagues. Even my first boss, who was a white male, but because of the position I was in, we were on equal footing and grounding. And I didn't have an expectation that it would change in either way. I never put anyone in that position over me. I just was not trained to do that. I'm sorry. And so I respect you. And if you treat me with respect, then we can get along. But I draw the line at disrespect, because I know what that feels like. And as a survivor of molestation, then I know exactly what that feels like. And that's where I get off of that particular train or plane or whatever it is. If they can respect, if a male ally can respect me and any female that I'm aware of is in their midst, then that means we can have a dialogue and we can have a conversation about what is actually we're experiencing. If there's no respect, that conversation is not going to happen. And so that's the best way that those allies can assist and support, is to be respectful of what's happening, of what you're saying is going on around you. Not that we need them to fix anything. We don't need a fixer, right? We need you to get out of the way or to be in this with us. I'm sorry. I feel very strongly about this because too many women or younger people too have to encounter this business. And it's very painful, it's very hateful, it's very traumatic filled in a workplace to have no one there to support you. That is supposed to be their job, right? But sometimes they fail in that.
I feel like a complex question, and we can go on in discussion for a while, but I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is I want for men in general, people who identify as men, to have a level of self-awareness around their power and privilege and how that impacts the spaces that they are leading. Whether you are a male or not, your title alone can give you power. It can give you influence. And thinking through how you're utilizing that power and influence, I think is super important and can be helpful in starting the journey of being effective. Once you realize the power and influence you have, then having that awareness can hopefully help to lead people into being more thoughtful around, like, oh gosh, I'm seeing these inequities, right? Let me listen more. Let me lean into hearing what people are saying and taking into consideration how my influence and power can affect that change. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. I definitely understand where Vanessa's coming from, and I agree. We don't need a fixer. We don't need somebody to, come with a white savior mentality, if you will. But I also love what you have to say, Carrie. In general, I think that we do need men to come in and listen and be self-aware and use their positions of power and influence to help move the needle forward. Because to be honest, we're tired. We're tired of doing, and I think that most of the time when it comes to change, when it comes to advocacy, we ask the most marginalized communities to pick up the torch. And again, I relate back to the workplace because that's just my field. But if you look at work in the workplace, I mean, 70+% of leadership are white males, right? And so we can't fix the leadership. We can't fix workplaces if we can't get 70% of the leadership to come on board. When it comes to the investment space, which I also operate in, it's actually 90%, more than 90% of check writers are men. Only 1.4 of all assets under management. So think about people that are managing money and are managing assets. Only 1.4% is managed by firms that are owned by women or people of color. So we need them engaged in this, but we need them listening. We need them understanding, and we need them to come to places like this, not to speak, not to position themselves as allies, but just to listen and to try to listen with an open heart and with understanding right in mind. So I think that's very important. And I will say, I I think there's a couple of things that have led to this, but actually, when I launched the fund to invest in women-led companies with women of color, very intentional to invest in women of color very intentionally. It was actually a lot of white men that came in and wrote some of my first checks. Now, I don't know that that is, because of I want to come and be, the person that changes this. Or I also don't know too that sometimes we as women and men of color, maybe because we have been thought that in order to have the few positions of power available to us, we need to compete with one another or whatever. Instead of supporting one another's efforts, we tend to compete. And I've experienced that as well, right? And I think, I don't know if it was you, Vanessa, or you, Carrie, that mentioned before, like we need to have open and honest conversations with ourselves and also keep ourselves accountable, right? When we're talking about gender equity, like there's a lot of things that we as women are doing that are actually more damaging. There's a lot that, our male colleagues of color are or are not doing, or are not stepping up to the plate to do. And we need to recognize those that are. So.
Wow, wow, a lot to think about, a lot to consider. I think as we were preparing for this panel, I was telling Kara, I was like, it's just such a big topic. Like, how do we fit or even try to begin to fit, all the important things in this topic? But I appreciate the nuance everyone's bringing to this conversation because I think it's important to understand it from the different nuances that are part of this topic. So thank you all for leaning into that space. And I know that was a little bit of a harder question, but thank you all for leaning into that. I appreciate it. So speaking of the flip side of that coin, right, with men allies and speaking of the C-suite and leadership and the finances attached to that, what did the glass ceiling look like for you all in your careers? And the whole idea between the glass ceiling versus the seat at the table or building your own table. Did that make sense? Can I clarify?
Yeah, can you clarify?
Yes, of course. So just to give some context for everyone in the audience as well, something that has been a conversation internally at OCCJ has been this idea of a glass ceiling, right? That for women going into leadership, or the idea of building your own table, right? So starting your own company, whatever that means for different people. So the idea of should we be trying to reach and break that glass ceiling, or should we be more focused on building our own table or getting a seat at the table, right? Because the glass ceiling is trying to get a seat at the table. So what is y'all's take on that?
I think it's, once again, nuanced, right? Because I think that if you look at it from one lens, one of my biggest pet peeves is that oftentimes a lot of the gender equity, particularly when it comes to women's like gender focus, a lot of times there are some women that will come in and instead of supporting primarily women of color that have been doing the work for years, they try to create their own initiative, right? Even though it's doing the exact same work, and probably can bring in more funding because they have more connections and more networks or perhaps even generational wealth, right? So I think in that sense, we need to, once again, act collectively and see if we can become part of grassroots organizations that have been doing the work for so long. On another hand, I will tell you that I actually decided to build our own table as with Vest. And I got a lot of heat from women when we did it. I heard from other women saying, well, but we need to be in the tables where men are already in. And by building Vest, you're just creating more division. And we should be instead applying for the white POs of the world, or buy in the chamber, that state chamber seat, so that we can have a say in how they're saying. And with that, I disagree. And I believe that we can build our own tables, because if you're going to just go to the table to continue to be ignored, if it's a pay to play only, and if it ultimately it's going to, it doesn't matter that you're there, right? And they're just going to either use you as a token and or just continue to ignore you, then I think you're just, again, you're going to feel lonely. You're going to feel like you're not moving the needle. And at that time, I do think it's time to build your own table with like-minded people that are committed to the mission, that are committed to the vision, that are committed to doing things differently, and that are vested in keeping each other accountable genuinely and transparently. I think it just depends. But I'm all for, particularly when it comes to marginalized communities, I'm all for building our own communities. And that doesn't mean that we can let other people in those tables, but we decide how those tables are made. And we decide what's going to be discussed in those tables and how intentionally we want to be about those tables.
And so I'm going to jump in here, Carrie, and let you have the end of it. But I'm listening to the language that we're using. Who's glass ceiling? Who made this glass? Who made this? Who made this? And let's redefine this, and that again, I go back to having that honest conversation with ourselves about what are we doing? What are we trying to do? And I'm all for an agreement with what Erica said about building your own table and making yourself feel comfortable where you are. It's not our fault that this type of a system is what we have to manage in. This type of a language we have to use around ourselves and who we are, what we are, that we have to manage in. But manage we do, right? And coming from a place, we all are sort of coming from a place of privilege one way or the other, and understanding that. But who gave us this language, and how can we redefine and restructure so that we can see ourselves in place and be in place with what we know we have, which is everything to come to the table, right? And then the issue then becomes is not repeating that bad thing that was done to us when we're there, not repeating that thing, not putting someone, a hand on somebody's shoulder to keep them down intentionally because of what we said earlier about that competition thing. So when you are at the table, whose table are you at? How do you want to be at that table? What does your table setting look like when you sit down? We can begin to have some ownership immediately.
So I think this, as stated, this is a nuanced question for me as well. Personally, I've not held the notion of there being a glass ceiling. It has been, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want my impact to look like? And based on that, where do I need to go to do that? And is there space and opportunity for me to do that in my workspace that I'm at? And when it has become very clear to me in whatever organization or workspace that I've been in, that maybe I'm not as valued as I'd like to be, or maybe I don't see a pathway of growth here, then I have finally exited and moved on to find those spaces where my impact will be felt, where my purpose feels fulfilled, and where I feel like I matter. And so I want us women to think about professions and growth and jobs and lifestyle living in that same manner. I don't know if it has just been this past year in life and all the things happening, but I want to feel ease. I want to feel balance. I want some joy. I want to be able to, when I get home, to mother my kids and have enough energy to pour back into them. And so, does that mean that I want to be in this space at this level? Taking all that into context. So I was like, this is difficult, but that's true where my heart is. And I want us to know that it's okay to not get to that COO, CEO, if that is not what you feel like your life's purpose is. If your life's purpose is to raise great human beings, then do that. But take this societal pressure off and really sit with self and know what it is you need and want and forge your pathway to get yourself there. And that sounds easy, but I know it's a lot of hard internal work. So I can't say that without prefacing that as well.
I just want to say I appreciate the cultural perspectives you all bring, with the different cultures that make you all who you are. I appreciate that nuance. And also, as we said earlier, the being able to bring that emotion into it, right? Because emotion can never be completely shut out from the work we do, right? And that's part of us showing 100%, showing up 100% at work. So I appreciate all of those nuances captured in all of your answers. I know we're supposed to go into a Q&A, but there is one question I think is very important for us to ask before we go to the Q&A. So sorry, everyone in the audience. But just to give a little bit of context, as you all probably are aware, Oklahoma has been passing a lot of anti-DI legislation, which has resulted in a lot of things. One such being the closing of the women's leadership program summer camp that was happening at OU, which proud to announce our intern is actually one of the last classes going through that program. Sad that it's ending, but with that in mind and with Oklahoma specifically in mind, we are ranked dead last in the nation for women's prosperity. How do we work together to change that?
Well, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
One of the main things about this is for us not to be discouraged. That it tells us, it informs us of where we are and who is in our midst. And just like any abusive relationship, the number one thing you should be doing is telling everybody. So every time I'm speaking to people, I'm telling them about Oklahoma, where we are, what this is. We are not crazy here. And sometimes as women, we oftentimes think, is this happening? What's happening is happening? Is this happening? Yes, it is. We are not the crazy ones. And the more that we talk to each other and tell each other what is going on, I think that starts to shift things, because that shift is going to happen in our homes with whomever those more powerful people might be that we might be associated with, that can affect something that needs to happen, which is a shift in the attitude that's going on. So when I saw that, my main thing that came up for me was to tell, and let's talk about it with each other, form coalitions together and move like a single body, so to speak, on this particular thing, because this is unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. But we've been here before with Oklahoma. This is nothing new. This is Oklahoma.
I would just say, I agree with Vanessa that we should be talking to each other. I would also say that we need to definitely not retreat, right? I think that we need to find courage in each other, in ourselves, to continue to tell the story, because the reason we are here, it's because it's actually working, right? People are afraid that DEI or inclusion or equity programs are actually working, and people were putting money on those efforts, and people were standing up for equity in ways in which, maybe Oklahoma wasn't used to in the past. And the worst thing that we can do is retreat, right? When it gets hard. But again, we've said before, it's going to feel very hard if you're doing it by yourself. That's why programs like OCCJ are so very important, and others that exist. So I think we need to do it together. And I think we need to double down. I think we also need to be smart about how we do so. Because I think a lot of our efforts, and I love how social media has democratized a lot of voices and given a platform for a lot of people that before didn't have a platform. but we also need to remember that we need to talk to people offline. And ultimately what's going to count is where the money goes, right? So we need to put money into backing candidates, into backing people that are actually for us, not against us. We need to talk to our relatives, even when it's uncomfortable. We need to talk to our friends. We need to challenge their thinking. We need to tell them the facts. Like, so for example, whether people like it or not, you know, when it comes to people, when it comes to, I hate that they call us a minority, because actually for the first time this year, more babies of color were born, right? And if you look at the next 10 years, we're actually going to become the new majority. And that's what's scaring people, right? Because that means voters, that means, you know, shifts in how economic spending is, the money's going to flow. And one of the things that we can combat that fear, you know, and so some of these politicians are banking on fear, right? Because it's easy to get people that are not close to us, that maybe don't have a lot of friends that look like us or whatever. It's easier to feed on their fear than to educate them, right? To say, hey, you know what? Oklahoma City is already 21% in the Latino population. It's getting ready to be 50% in 10 years. We should be inclusive of that community, right? And we should learn how to work with each other. Immigration is another thing. Don't get me started, right? But we're not talking about that because it's easy to feed on fear, and it's easy to hold on to power for that. And the last thing we need to do is to retreat. We need to double down, and we need to hold each other accountable. Because a lot of us are retreating, or a lot of us are saying, well, you know, I don't want to make so and so mad. Oh, well, you know, my organization might lose funding from the governor because he's very vindictive, or from whoever funder because he's close to, you know, so and so. That's not going to work. If we're prioritizing our well-being, or the funding, or the money, and all of that, and not the mission, and not the goal, then what are we doing? We're just compounding this, you know, we're compounding inequality if we choose to give up on our morals, and if we choose to retreat, and if we choose to not to hold each other accountable.
I agree with everything Ness and Erica shared. It's not much that I can really add to that. I think too, people understanding the impact of what's happening. I'm not sure that people are connected with, okay, this has been decided and this is being enacted, but then what does that look like? Who is that impacting, and how is it impacting? And so I think when we're having these conversations, it's really important that we understand those pieces and are specifically calling out and talking about those pieces so that we're informed and we're helping to inform other people. Because I think that part gets lost a lot of times. It's just the awareness, but people don't understand who's being impacted or harmed in different capacities. So I think specifically calling those things out can be extremely helpful too.
Well, thank you all for leaning into this discussion in space. I know we have 5 minutes left, and I want to respect our panelists' time as well as everyone here. So with that, I will hand it over to Morgan to take one question from Q&A, and then I'll let Morgan wrap up our panel. So no time is wasted in that transition. Also, something to note, I'm dropping a survey link. If you would like to give us feedback on this conversation and what conversations you want to see us have in the future, please feel free to do that. And with that, here you go, Morgan.
Okay, y'all, I know you may have already seen this in the chat, but this is the question. I think it's a powerful place to end on. When did you recognize your individual value as women of color in the professional space? What series of events, or maybe what magical moment happened? And so when did you transition to standing in your own power?
That is a great question. Very beautiful question. I can start because the first thing that came to mind when asking this question was, it took a long time for me to recognize the power that I have as a woman of color in a professional space and setting. prior to being here, I did work in the university setting, and was typically the youngest person at the table. One of maybe two people of color, women of color at the table. And at the table with folks who had higher degrees, PhDs, MDs. And so in that space, I often felt small, or like my voice didn't matter, even though I had this title, that with the assumption of having some authority or power. Being in that space though, I felt small, to be just really honest. It wasn't until I came into my current role and I was looking at this job description and I thought to myself, like, oh, I'm gonna actually maybe refer a friend or someone else to it. But I looked at the job description and I was like, wait, I've done this. I mean, I just went down each point and it's like, I've done that. And in that moment, I felt like I realized the power in myself and who I am and the value of what I bring to my profession. And so it took a long time. It took a long time. Being in spaces where you're not considered or your voice isn't considered, you have a seat at the table, you're not given space or opportunity to talk, or it doesn't seem like your opinion matters. You're there figuratively. And so standing in your own power, I think, is such a internal process too. There's some work and a level of work sometimes, but culturally, I think we haven't talked about this a lot, but culturally, in my father's household, he is Mexican. I'm a first generation Mexican American, and there was not a lot of permission to like use my voice or to add an opinion in, and that transcended into the workspace where I'm sitting at the table and I'm like, I can say something here, and so some of the cultural identity pieces too have played a role in me being able to use my voice and understanding the power that I do have at the table. But love this question, Diana, and thank you for asking.
Carrie, I love you even more now that I know your cultural background too. I will just say that I realize the responsibility I have to use my voice and my position of influence and whatever privilege I have when I saw how it affected other women, particularly my two daughters, right? I have one daughter that's gay and in the state of Oklahoma, and I was always aware of that, but it became very real when it was, my daughter that, can be discriminated against and all of that. And then my youngest daughter also has a mild form of cerebral palsy. So with a disability and a learning disability also, like I just started thinking, how do I want them to react when treated with discrimination, with racism, with biases, with microaggressions? How do I want to model what they should be doing? And then also not just for them, but just for my fellow colleagues. I mean, listening to the stories of other women with different lived experiences, different backgrounds, and how they experience a workplace. I feel a great sense of responsibility to stay true to not just what works for me, but what works for us as a collective, and not focus so much on the power or proximity to money or proximity to profit, but more so on the freedom of women and the freedom of other communities that we haven't really had, for so long. And I do see that future. And I think that we all have the responsibility to use whatever power, whatever voices we've been able to foster to then benefit the collective.
And so I come from a big family, and I didn't really ever have to talk in my family. I didn't have to speak. I didn't have to say anything. Everything was done for me. My sisters and brothers, my sisters in particular, always took care of everything. And so I didn't discover I didn't have a voice until other things started to happen to me outside of my family. But then something very important happened. My oldest cousin graduated from Wayne State University when she was like 60-something years old. After she had raised her 6 children, she decided to go back to school and get her bachelor's degree. And she was still going to be around children because her degree was in child development. But I looked at her and I saw, and I think I even wrote in a book I gave to her that she was such an inspiration. She was very quiet. She still is. She's 100 years old now. She's really quiet and very much so an introvert, but she moves with a great deal of strength, as many women that I find in my life do. Not until my daughter was a little bit older did I have to speak for her in a very defining way so that she would not be marginalized among her peers in a predominantly white space. And went from there, I just kept sailing on. So it comes up for me whenever I see someone else being mistreated, not acknowledged, feeling as though they're not seen. That's when my leadership, I think, shows up the most and is most important for me.
Thank you all so much for being vulnerable and sharing these personal stories at the very end. And thank you again, Diana, for sharing the question, because it was the absolute cherry on top to this discussion. I want to thank everybody for being here today. We want to thank you as OCCJ for being here today. If you want to keep the conversation going, like these wonderful women said during this panel, it's not just engaging together online in this space, it's also seeing each other in person, continuing these conversations after we leave. So let's keep the conversation going. I want to let you know that we do have a program coming up this summer for youth. Again, thinking about how a lot of these powerful moments, finding your power, comes in the form of being in a space where you're told that, yeah, you do have that power. Any Town is a program this summer for teens across the whole state to come together and learn about their shared power and their shared vision for a more beautiful Oklahoma. So if you know a young person, 14 to 18, who would be interested in that, let them get connected with us. Again, thank you so much to Carrie and Vanessa and Erica and the OCCJ team, to the brilliant Victoria and Kara who plan these and execute them to absolute stunning level. So grateful to be here with everybody today. And with that, have a wonderful week, everybody.